In our last chapter, the world shifted. Across oceans, across empires, across crowns. But not all revolutions came with sails. Some stirred in silence, in doubt, and in England. It began with an empty cradle. But it would end with a broken church, a new queen, and an empire refusing to kneel. In 1521, King Henry VIII of England had no heir, a fading patience, and, though he did not yet know it, a growing list of grievances against Rome. Somewhere across the globe, ships braved typhoons in search of spices. Men died for cloves, cinnamon, and the promise of a new world. And in England, a king faced a different kind of hunger, the need for a son. In 1521, King Henry VIII stood at a personal crossroads. He was now 30 years old, the age by which most kings had already secured their legacies. 5 years earlier, Queen Catherine of Aragon had given birth to Mary. Before and after that came miscarriages, stillbirths, and infants who never lived long enough to be named. Legally, a daughter could inherit the throne and become queen. But Henry wasn't convinced. A male successor meant stronger royal authority, and Henry didn't want to leave that to chance. Catherine had once been married to Arthur, Henry's older brother. That union was said to be unconsummated. But what if it wasn't? What if their marriage, built on political alliance, was cursed from the start? He never said it aloud, but the idea stayed, and it grew. Yet if Catherine failed as a mother to the Tudor dynasty, she would prove herself a true daughter of warriors. Years earlier, in 1513, while Henry waged war in France, it was Catherine who faced an invasion at home. As Scottish forces crossed the border, the Spanish-born queen rallied troops, secured supplies, and oversaw defenses. When the English army crushed the Scots at Flodden, it was Catherine who sent Henry the cloak of the fallen Scottish king, a stark reminder of her capability. But to Henry, her competence only deepened his frustration. She could manage a crisis. She could inspire loyalty. She could even defend the kingdom. But she could not give him a son. Henry didn't yet seek a divorce. He was still a faithful son of the church. Europe, meanwhile, was ablaze with ideas. Martin Luther's 95 Theses had spread like wildfire. The Pope's authority was under siege. Henry, unlike many kings, did not sit idle. He wrote a Latin treatise in 1521 titled Assertio Septem Sacramentorum, defending the core sacraments of Catholicism and attacking Luther's rebellion. Pope Leo X, impressed by Henry's contribution, granted him the title Defender of the Faith, an honor that would later be revoked by Rome, yet defiantly retained by Henry through an act of Parliament. That year, a young woman arrived at court. Not the fairest, not the loudest, but someone who had been educated in the courts of Burgundy and France, wielded wit and political acumen. Her name was Anne Boleyn. Her sister, Mary Boleyn, had already been Henry's mistress, a fleeting pleasure. Anne, unlike her sister, refused the king's advances, not directly, not rudely, but with measured distance. She was a lady-in-waiting to Queen Catherine, but what she truly waited for, only she knew. And Henry began to notice. Meanwhile, the world beyond England's shores was shifting, and fast. Spanish and Portuguese fleets returned from the east, heavy with pepper, cloves, nutmeg, and silver. Entire fortunes packed in crates, yet no English ship sailed among them. The Treaty of Tordesillas of 1494, blessed by the Pope, had divided the world between Spain and Portugal. To explore or trade beyond Europe was to defy Rome, a constraint Henry would no longer tolerate. A king who couldn't sail freely, trade freely, or even remarry freely was no king at all. And Henry, who once defended the faith, began to resent the hand that crowned him. By 1526, after years of calculated restraint, Anne saw her moment. As the king's obsession had deepened, she played her final card. "If you would have me," she whispered, "it must be as your queen." For Henry, the idea of a son with Anne and a future without Catherine was no longer fantasy. He petitioned Rome for an annulment. He claimed his marriage had never been valid in the eyes of God, that it was cursed from the start. But he got no answers from Rome. The Pope delayed, then stalled, then vanished behind excuses. It wasn't about doctrine, it was about power. After Charles V's troops sacked Rome in 1527, Pope Clement VII was confined to Castel Sant'Angelo, a puppet under imperial control. And here lay Henry's fatal obstacle. Charles was not just any emperor, but Catherine of Aragon's devoted nephew. To annul his aunt's marriage would be a personal insult to the very man whose armies now guarded and imprisoned the Pope. Henry waited. He argued, appealed, threatened. But Rome remained silent. Then the defender of the faith became its destroyer. In 1529, he dismissed Catherine from court. Her chambers were emptied. Her name was omitted. Anne remained. She was more than a courtier. She was the future. By late 1532, Anne's pregnancy forced Henry's hand. A son was now within reach, or so he prayed. Henry secretly wed her in January 1533, which preceded both the birth of another daughter and England's break with Rome. In November 1534, Parliament declared Henry supreme head of the Church of England, further severing ties with Rome. Pope Paul III's excommunication came years later, but to Henry, it was a meaningless decree from a foreign power. The break was complete. What began with a cradle ended in a crown no longer blessed by Rome,